All right, so today, session 7, we are going to look at the full stack JavaScript example that you guys have to do for Milestone 2. Now, I am not going to code the whole Milestone 2, of course, otherwise it wouldn't be an assignment on points. It's like giving you the answers to the exam and you just typing them over. That's not what we're going to do. I'm going to give you a very bare bones example of where your code needs to be and what each piece of code is responsible of. So what is the front end doing? What is the back end doing? What is happening in the database? Those 3 parts. So, and then we're going to check how our full stack asks for data from one part out of the database and then moves it through the chain. So knowing how to get your data from a different part of your website, that's the most important thing. As you might see on my site, it's my amazing website that gets board games from my database from Mongo. I try to use a minimalistic design, to get to the essence of what we actually need, which is the data. So I think I succeeded in that regard. And well, we're going to see how we can make this. And then, of course, in your milestone, you need to have a list of items that you get from your database, like properly shown on your screen. You need a form where you fill some data in and then save that data to the actual database. And after I give this small demo, I am available for the rest of the session. You guys will work further on your assignment because it's due on Sunday evening. And if you have questions, you can ask them, of course, to me. If you're stuck on something, you can ask them to me and we'll go through it one-on-one. But I hope that at least some of the issues will be resolved after my initial session and once I give you some info, because I got some weird questions on how do I get Node in my front end and stuff like that. It's not a bad question, but it's a question that signals that you don't understand the matter of Node, not yet anyway. So from 2 sessions ago, we saw Node for the first time. Then the last session was Node and Express. So all those things didn't have anything to do with a website. It was standalone code that acted as a server or as a web server in the case of Express. So both of those things, Node is a separate entity. And that's what I'm going to try to show you today, in the sense that where does each piece of code live and how are they segmented? Because that's the most important thing of today. So I'm going to start with this. This is my piece of code. I did this in about an hour and a half, 2 days ago, with the help of the Pluralsight course that I gave to you as well, and of course the official Node documentation. So there are some things that the person giving the Pluralsight course does differently. Fine by me. If you can do it the same way and explain it to me during the oral exam, no problem. But the important part there is explain it during the oral exam. All right. Now, the 3 important parts that we have is our front end, our back end, and our database. Now, our database, we have that already. I'm just going to log in again. Mongo Atlas, come on. Mongo Atlas. All right. Sign in. Last time. So our database has been set up from previous example. If you have not done this, you need to watch the tutorial from last time and actually understand on how to work with that database. I made a whole database demo on the previous clip, and that should be on YouTube as well. If not, let me know, then I can fix that. But again, on my cluster, I have a couple of collections, and one of those collections is a board game collection. Of course, as you can see right behind me. Come on. Aha. So I have voorbeeld database. Actually, don't need that. It's cleaner. So I only have one database. Like a database, you could see that in our cases, one database is used per project. So we have one database that has a series of not tables in a NoSQL database. It has collections of documents, and those documents have data in properties or fields. So I use the full stack demo database, which will contain all the things that I need for my demo. I only need one thing, which is a collection, a board game collection. That's it. In that board game collection, of course, there's going to be board games. Each document is one board game. So again, I have Terra Mystica, just like the ones you've been working with for the previous exercises. Again, you know the structure by now if you have made the exercises, so this should be no surprise here. The only thing that I did is add a new field, BGG ID, Board Game Geek ID, which in the JSON file you've used up until now was the identifier and the actual property name. Now I placed it in here because Mongo itself generates a unique ID, and I didn't want to override that. So that's standard behavior, basic behavior. We're just going to use that. I have 4 games. I'm going to delete this one because this is from my test. So initially you should have 3 games. After the test that you did, or the last session that I gave, you should have seen that the 3 games are in my collection, and then you're ready to go. So database part 1 is done, is located, if I'm not mistaken, we placed it in Ireland. So take a Guinness and enjoy your database. It's on a different place. It's a different location. It's in the cloud, okay, but it's also on a physical server somewhere. The cloud is not something magical. It's somewhere running, and we chose for the region of Ireland. So to put it in place, it's on a separate place, meaning if I tomorrow develop from Brussels, from Antwerp, or from Japan, doesn't matter, I can still access my database. I can still make my application work just based on a connection ID, a URL, whatever you need. The same logic is happening for front-end and back-end. The only thing is that during development, they're both on your PC. But eventually, one of the last lessons, we're going to place that API somewhere else. Still need to figure out where, but still. A question in the chat. Would you rather recommend we use the ID of MongoDB or use our own IDs? The ID of MongoDB. Why? Because it's automatically, so you have to write extra code to override it. Each time that you write a document to the database, to a collection, it will automatically generate an ID for you. So that ID, for linking in between, use that one. Now, this ID that I say, BGG ID, has a separate meaning for me. It's not only a unique identifier, but it's also on Board Game Geek, Terra Mystica. In my case, it's also something that is linked to an external software. So in this case, Board Game Geek, the actual board game, yeah, I cannot see it in here, I think. Nope, it's in the URL. So say that I want to create URLs for Board Game Geek based on the data that I have in here. I can just concatenate that with the ID. So it has a different meaning besides just being a unique ID to identify. So that's why I added it. If it was the only purpose of having a number assigned to the board game, that was its only purpose, I would not have done it, because I have that number, which is _ID. There are multiple things in the documentation for MongoDB that will show you how to work with those IDs. So I hope that that is an explanation for your question. Again, KISS, keep it stupid simple. Keep it simple stupid, whatever the acronym is. Now, let me think. Where were we? So we had a database. We have now the front end and the back end. Now, as I said, I have a map front and a map back end. So we're going to take a look on what is in there. Of course, we're going to see my perfect minimalistic site. As you can see, just beauty. I don't even use CSS. It's that minimalistic. So I just have a basic HTML page, of course, just a simple H1, and a content div. Why? Because I didn't want to do console log again. And and I wanted to show the data on my screen. And very, very basically, if I open my page and I see the content, then it's okay. If I don't see it, something went wrong. And then I need to open the console log, just in case. Good. Now, I have written this, I've worked on this for multiple hours. Don't be surprised by the amount of code, but this is it. That's the only thing that's in the front end. Okay, so very basically, I have some dummy data. That's to test a post request later, not for now. Window on load. Of course, I'm gonna run the script when the page is loaded. Simple, easy peasy. I have an asynchronous function, and I'm going to run that asynchronous function. That's all it does. Now, what is that function going to do? It's going to fetch data. Let's see if my server is still running. Server is still running. Give me a second. We are going to fetch data from my API. So my API being the one that I have in my other folder. Okay. We'll come to that in a second. You see my route that I'm using. HTTP / localhost 4000, which is the port that I'm using. And then for everything that has a route in my API, I use the prefix API, just to make it more clear that to see exactly what I'm doing. And then of course, board games. I'm just getting all the board games. That's it. Okay. I'm getting that. We've done this multiple times. You've done this multiple times in Dev 2 as well. I am getting the data and I'm waiting until that asynchronous function is finished. If it's finished, I get a response. And then that response, I convert that to a JSON or to an object, basically. And then that object, I can just paste in my document model. So in my div, I'm going to stringify that and I'm going to shoot it right in. Or you can work with here and do some calculations or loops, loop-de-doops, and that's it. All right. So again, what you do with your data, that's up to you. You should be knowing how to work with JSON data, with object data from JavaScript by now. If not, go back to the previous exercises and remake those without watching the tutorials. Like actually try to remake those. That's the front end. That's all it does. It just gets the data. Now, of course, we have our database. We have our front end. And what we are asking in our front end is data that is located in a database. But you cannot directly access the database, or it should not be doable from a front end. Because why? Not only for hacking is this dangerous. It's just, what if you do something wrong as a developer? Straight access to there without any sort of mediary in between is not a good idea. Now, mostly, I don't think I should see. You probably could do access to Mongo, Atlas, etc. through that, but the perfect scenario is actually to have that middle part, which is the backend. And the backend is going to take that request. You're going to do some magic, and then that magic is going to say, okay, now we have valid data. Get the data from the database, we get it back, we transform it to a valid JSON file, and we send it back to the front end. That's the basic gist of those things. All right? Is everybody still with me? We have our three parts, completely independent. I can give my front end to you, my backend I keep to me, and we just change the URLs, and we're done. It should work. Is this clear on how those three work together? Because that was a question that I got a couple of times during the holiday. Just flood the chat. All right. Good. Of course, now we're going to see the most important part. Now, you have been working with Express. You've made a web server. Done. Works. Easy. You've made a Mongo connection with my previous tutorial, last session. Works perfectly. Now, we're going to be combining those two. All right, so my node folder, I am running it in a different PowerShell window. This is just Windows Terminal. Why? Because I tend to like my real estate, and especially for teaching, I do not like to have my terminal open constantly here because it even eats more into my screen Of course, there are students with like 4K screens, then it doesn't hurt to have it on the same screen. I like to have, in my dual screen setup, I like to have the actual NodeMon or the instance that is running in a different window on a separate screen. And then in my left eye, when it sees like something blinking red, then I know something is wrong and I can still keep focusing on my code. All right, personal preference again. But now what I will do is NodeMon, I'm in the correct folder, index, and we're done. Now, two things you see here. Of course, that stupid deprecation warning, you can ignore that, but above that deprecation warning, you see example app listening at HTTP localhost 4000, okay, and then connected to database, full stack demo, perfect. Now, of course, I wrote those console logs, but where did I write them, and how does my node server work? Good. So again, to work with npm packages, you need your package.json file. So you need an npm project. So npm init-y, npm init, and follow the steps. Both are valid options to actually create your npm project. Again, look to the previous exercises to see how you make that. Package.json. I have multiple things in here. Again, I followed the tutorial for Pluralsight as well. Again, we will go over the tips that I have later. I lost my train of thought. Yeah, so in that Pluralsight course, he takes a kind of a different approach. He uses Mongoose, of course, as an npm package. We don't use that. Well, you can, but if you do, you need to explain yourself at the oral exam. That's a difference. I know how to work with Mongoose, but it complicates some things to get the basic full stack principle across. And we don't need it for, to be fair, such a simple application that we're going to build. So in here, a couple of things here. Dependencies. What do I need? Which packages do I need? Well, I need Express and MongoDB, of course. And then I have body parser and course itself. We will look at them in the code to see when we are using it and why we are using it. That's later. Don't worry about that later. ESLint, that's new to me. I mostly use specific linting from my IDE, but apparently you can do linting based on a package as well. I followed the course because I wanted to see the multiple setups. So again, he explains perfectly what linting is or why you should use this. So again, look at the first part of that tutorial. Then NodeMon config, very interesting. I've never used it this way as well, but if you add this to your package.json file, that means that if you run your server with NodeMon, it can take these environment files, environment variables, which means that I mostly use a different way in development or production because I don't use NodeMon in production. But in this case, it can take, for NodeMon, it can take those variables and you can read them in your index.js. The perfect example is, hold on a second. Gonna close most things up. For example, in here, this is the basic Express setup. So we have our actual Express server. We have our body parser and course, come to that later. We have our Express. I will just gonna clean it up a bit. All right. So we have Express. Of course, we're gonna create our new app as you've seen it in the getting started guide and in the last one. We're gonna use the router. Again, more on that later. I'm gonna give you some more info to make sense of why that guy in the tutorial is using the router. It's a best practice that is commonly known throughout API development. And I thought, well, I was not planning on teaching you, but hey, let's use this moment to actually learn you on how to use one of the most used techniques in API development and how to build your routes effectively and logically. All right. And here we are, process.env.environment.port. And if you can see in the package.json, port is 4000 here. So it takes in, it can access that environment file if you run it with nodemon. And the cool thing is if you add a pipe there, so double pipe, which means or, of course, something something or something something. If this is empty or null, then it will take 3000. So as you saw in my console log here, body parser is not defined. Yeah, of course. Leave it to me. Where is it? Voila. Localhost 4000. So it takes in correctly. Middleware. I'll come to that later. I will place them there. And then Mongo config. Again, that Mongo config, we did that in the previous exercise. You can do that here as well. We require the MongoDB. We will use our URI, so our URL. Again, we find that, come on. Here in connect, and then connect your application. And then you can just take this URI, or you can do the full example of how to connect. My database name is full stack demo, and I'm going to create a new client so that if I have the client and I connect later, as you will see at the start of my API, then afterwards I have full power of closing and opening the connection if I have this variable. If I immediately go, which I can also do, mongo client.connect, then I straightly work and like I don't have a variable then to disconnect from. So I do only one connection and that's about it. We're not going to do that. So I have my client, which is the Mongo client. It's not connected yet. We need to access the connect function, and I will show you in a second where that is. Now, middleware, come to that in a second, not for now. Best practices. And then what do I have here? I have the router. I have a simple, again, this is also middleware, but specific one. The get request on localhost. If I see, if I go to localhost on port 4000, I will get hello world. We can test that. It's running. So localhost 4000, send hello world, done. My API is running. I'm off to the races. Now, where is my database connection? We have multiple ways of doing this. There are pros and cons for each of them. For my simple explanation here, for my simple exercise, I'm gonna open my database connection in my API the moment I start my API, and I just leave it open. Like at the moment, unless you write really shitty code, you should have no issues leaving that open. Otherwise, you can open and close the connection each time you access a route, but that takes some more. There are some best practices in the Mongo documentation. I have scanned through them. I have not gone through them yet. So if you want that approach, you can do that. Again, app listen. That's starting the server. Console log, example app is listening to localhost 4000. Okay, then client connect. That's just connecting. Again, we specify the URI here, the URL. So the client already has all the info it needs to connect to the database. Now, if we just do client.connect, if it throws an error, then we will throw it. Like if we get a value back, then we will throw it and it's done. Your application will crash because we have no proper error handling. You will see that in Dev 3 mostly. But if we go through here, so if there is no error, then we get the database. As you can see, client.db database name. That is my full stack demo database. Which is the one we will see here on the left side. This is the database. And then just a console log just to check if we're connected to the database. All right, now we're connected. Now, the only thing we need to do is in the get request is get the correct collection to work from. So in our collection will be board games, which is this one. Then we will do a find, we will insert something. I have 2 examples ready to show you. So, route. The person in the tutorial works with the express router, which is a better way of working with routes, of course, than the single ones. Now, it will allow you to implement best practices regarding routes in APIs. Now, I wrote them all down for the last session. They're also in Teams as well. So I will, let me check, Teams, Multimedia, Web 2. I will share it on the screen. Give me a second. All right, so as you might see, I have the Node.js Mongodb drivers here, which is the documentation you need, which is what I will be using in a second. The Pluralsight course, which is here. And you will see that I have not completed a lot because I know most of it, but I just wanted to see how he worked. So in the getting data, I think I stopped at the summary. So this gives you all the things and more to work out that milestone for sure. And then, of course, the general connection advice to Mongo. Use the client connect function in the app.listen as I have just shown, and store the correct database in a variable. Per route, so each route, you retrieve the collection that is needed for that action. All right. And then I will show it here. It's a bit bigger. We have best practices. Now, you might be building your routes as in a get route, get board game. A get route, get board games, get all board games, whatever. A post route, add board game. Update board game, all different routes. That's not the way you build them in real life, like in the work environment. There are some best practices, as in you only have one route, board games. That's it. As you might see, these are all my routes. Board games, board games, board games, blah, 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 blah. Say that 20 times. Now, it depends what type of request you send and what type of data you add to that request. All right, that's the difference. So if we see here, we have our get request. We have our get request. And if we do a get request to /board games, then we get all the board games. Get request to board games. I don't pass anything in. And I have Gloomhaven, Food Chain Magnet, and Terra Mystica. That's it. All right. Now, if we would like to add some filtering, I've not created that yet. That's for you. But there are params you can add. Again, the data you pass along in a GET request is located in the URL. In a POST request is located in the body. So in a GET request, we can add parameters like this. Question mark, genre, strategy, for example. And then I can filter on this. He does that, by the way, in his course. I will not do it here. I will just give you the options. That's the second one. So if you have the same GET request, again, I did not add a new route. It's the same GET request as you will see here. And then you can see, does it have params? Does it have parameters? A query string? Then it will get a specific board game list, or that's what I want it to do. Okay. And of course, another one is, for example, something like this. Or even better, this is the actual ID. Just, it looks like you have a new route. It looks like you have a route that is board game / and a number. But it's basically, you can build your routes that way that you can just add like some dynamic identifier, and then whatever is placed after board games, you can just retrieve in your code. Again, he also does that in that tutorial. Where is it? It's all in the getting data stuff. So again, if you're still unclear on what an API is and REST and how he sets up NodeMon and the things that I did, that's the first part, 25 minutes. If you just want to get data and get all the board games, get a specific board game on ID and get a board game based on a query, all of that is explained in here. in very small pieces. So he explains it very well. He also goes quite fast, which is good for me. So your mileage may vary. Just slow it down a bit, try something out, and test it out. Again, always start with testing out an API with Postman, and only then use your front end. Because if you use your front end and you have problems, you might not know yet where the problem lies. Is it in the front end? Is it in the back end? Is there a specific issue in between? If your knowledge is up to par, then you will immediately identify that, but you're still learning. So try to verify piece by piece. Does this work with Postman? Yes. Okay, then this same request needs to work when I do a fetch request from my front end. Okay. Those three are all GET requests. Very easy. The next routes, of course, have data in their bodies. Data in their bodies. We can make so many jokes about that. But still, the post request / board games, same route. But you can add something in there, and the post request will actually, or like it's meant to, save the board game to the database as a new one. Put, it's also something new for you guys. Like post, we're using more for new board games to the database. So for example, if you fill in your form, which is one of the milestone questions, if you fill in your form, press the save button, you should access the post board games route. Say that, and if you do that, you actually get extra points. Use an update. Say you have that list of board games and you click on that one specific one and you see that the theme or the genre is not correct. You adjust that and you save that. You have two options. One option is put. Put is saving a board game, replacing everything. So my apologies, it expects the complete board game object in the body of that request. Very important. Patch is different. It saves the same board game. It also updates it, but it only updates the fields necessary. Now, what is the difference? In the body of that request, you only pass along the fields that need to change. So for example, in a put request, we place this whole block of things, like everything. That's what you should put in a put request. In a patch request, you only do like ID and name if you want to change the name. And then you have specific methods, which we will see in the documentation. Let me check in the Mongodb driver. So for the fundamentals, CRUD operations, write operations, changing a document. And then you have, let me check, update document field, replace your field. And then, where is it? I had a list somewhere. Insert a document. Insert many, insert one, delete, change, insert or update in a single. Update one, for example. What is your query? What is your update? What is your options if you want it? Update one, for example, is one of them. They're all in here. If you go over that and you see all the specific examples, it will make sense, more sense than I just scrolling over this. All right. So again, learn to work with documentation, because again, if I show you step by step how it works and after that you understand it, but then they update the packages, they update the versions, and maybe even breaking changes, and you don't know how to fix it because you only, in a couple of years, you only have my tutorial somewhere stored on your hard drive, my tutorial will not work anymore because I'm working with an older version. So the skills that I want to teach you again is to try something, break something, fail at something, and then fix it. And fixing that will teach you so much more than me holding your hand and typing out the code for you. All right. Put, patch, post. Okay. And then delete, of course, again, the same route, but delete, you pass along an ID, you pass along the complete object, and you can delete that from your database. Question from the chat. Which do we use if you want to give the user the choice to choose if they want to change one thing or the whole thing? You do not let the user choose. It's up to the developer. I had a good scenario for one person who asked, what if we want to delete something from an object or a document? So for example, I will go to Atlas. So in this case, I have Terra Mystica. It has a genre, it has mechanisms, and it has a description. Say, my apologies. Say that I do not need the genre anymore. I don't want it. And he asked, what if I want to delete the genre? Can I do that with patch, like just a specific field? I said, no, that's not the point. Like with patch, you can set a value to 0. For example, you can set the genre to nil, or an empty string or a 0. You can empty the value, but actually deleting this and changing the structure of the object, that would be a put, because you're replacing it with a different object, basically. You're changing the structure of it. Then I would use put. To your question, how do you give the user the choice? You don't. First of all, it's discouraged, not recommended, to delete fields from existing documents in a collection. Why? Because even if your project is small, it can be that somewhere in your code there is a reference to boardgame.genre. And if you get an object back that does not have that genre, it will just plain crash because it cannot find that property. It cannot find that field. So unless you have some amazing error handling, I would not delete fields. Think about what data you want to save, structure it like that, and if you make a change like you're going to delete genre, delete it for everything, and then you make sure that your front end can handle that as well. I will not give the choice to the user, because you have to decide if someone is actually in how should I say this? You're writing the code to update an object, and make sure, for example, if you have, it's based on your scenario. What I would do is, if you have full CRUD capability, full create, read, update capability, and you allow a user to change everything from that specific document, be it a manga, an anime, a board game, whatever else you guys are using. I saw F1 pilots, also good. If you can change anything out, always use put. If you do okay, you save this and you can only change the name from that from now on, then you can use patch. I will be happy. I will be very happy if I at least see get with query strings, post and put, and delete. If I see those 5, then you've shown to me that you can access a wide array of requests for that project. Put and patch is a bit semantics whenever you want to use it. So again, the end user doesn't choose it, the developer chooses it when to use it. But for our case, I think put is the best case solution. I hope that answers your question. Now, a question, can we use the dummy data of the board games for Milestone 2? For Milestone 2, I would suggest to actually use data from your project already. Why? Because I would not do board games. First of all, I'm displaying board games, so you can just type this over and it will work. Use realistic data from your API. So either pull something in from your API in the front end, rework that and save it to your database. That's one option. Second option, if you have a user system that you want to do, start working on that authentication system. Make a login screen and compare that data to the users in the database. That's also something you can do. Try not to use board games. I would heavily discourage it. All right. Now that I've gone over this best practice on routes, now this will actually make more sense. Question in chat, if you have multiple APIs, is it enough to have one fully working one already? Yeah, sure. If you can show me you can work with one API, you can work with the other one as well. It's just basic on how complex is the data that you're getting back, and see what you can do with it. Again, I don't think Milestone 2 doesn't doesn't even ask for API usage. That might be for milestone 3. But if you can show that you can combine your own code and own data in Mongo database with a front, backend, and database and API usage, very nice. Very nice. Well, it's you have to get there eventually. So if you do it now, you save yourself some time for later. So but now this makes more sense. Like I saw this in the tutorial and was like, oh yeah, I know what this is, but will the students get this? Well, this is basically why I explained the whole best practices thing, because this is what the router does. It creates one route / board games, and then depending on what kind of request you send, you can add different code to it. Okay? And that's basically it. Before I get into how to get the data from database, I want to say one more thing about middleware. Now, middleware is something that might be a question that comes onto the theoretic exam. I don't know. Maybe. What is middleware? Middleware is code that is intercepting the requests from the front end to the back end, changing something to it or doing something with it, and then just passing it along. In this case, it has a body parser. Body parser, what does that mean? In this case, well, this particular package, it actually takes the body of a post request of anything any request that has a body, and it will automatically make it an object or like JSON. It will convert it to a readable object, as we will see in a second in the post request. That's body parser. That's what you need if you look on how to get data from your body. How to get data from the body of a request. Body parser is probably the first thing you're gonna come across, and it's also something that is recommended by Express. Of course you have course errors that some might have seen. There's a whole blog post on that on Mozilla on cross-origin resource. Something I forgot the actual. So cross-origin resource sharing. So it basically says like who is allowed to access my routes. Standard behavior is that you need to add headers to it to a request to be allowed into your API. That's to prevent DDoS attacks, stuff like that, all those things. You can just set that open, which is what I did. The course package, which is a very simple package. Again, you can look these up at npmjs.com of .org, and you can look that package on there. It has some explanation. If you just add this as a middleware, it will basically get every request that's coming in, make it course friendly, and allow it into your API. That's all you need to know, and it should work, basically. And of course, we have one more, which says that for every route that has /API on it, every request, use the router to further the route to its correct endpoint, which is, of course, if we use API /board games, then each route with API /board games will have an endpoint found in here. If I need another endpoint, say I want users, bgrouter.use.route. So for example, if I were to manage users, if I use the get functionality, I can pass along, I will pass along all the users, for example. If I do post, I can make a function in here that saves new users. If I can I can have update profile, all that things. So that's in there. A couple of questions in the chat. Doesn't understand what the milestone in the milestone. There's no use of an API. If I'm not mistaken, I do not use API usage yet. What I mean by like external API. So most of you have an external API that you're going to be using for data. For example, the Kitsu API, the Anime API. Oh, careful. The Anime API, a Manga API, whatever you're going to be using to get your external data from. That's not even needed in this exercise. Like, you don't need to do anything yet for your Milestone 2 with that external API. We're going to be using your backend, your own API. That's what we are going to be using. All right. So you're going to be managing your own data first before you even call data from another website. So say you're doing something with OMDB to get movies. Forget OMDB for Milestone 2. If you can add it, and if you can be experimental with it, and you can show me that you can combine data from OMDB, add some stuff, save it to your own database, perfect. Even more points and more power to you. But otherwise, don't need it. I hope that is clear. What will you get when you enter localhost 4000/API? What the exact error will be, I don't know, but I have a feeling that I know what it will get. Cannot get /API. There is no endpoint /API. Why? Because the endpoints are generated by the router itself. In my case, the BG router, the board game router, whatever. There is no API endpoint. This just says app.use. It says that every route coming through /.API needs to use the BG router to find the correct endpoint. Now, there is no /API endpoint. Like, this is not an endpoint. This is everything from here, go to the router. That's it. The question again, so you don't have to see data with the get, just the setup has to be set well. No, you need to see data. But again, we have two different APIs. We have an API is the one you're building right now. This is my API, this folder. That you need to do. That's your backend web server with Express. That's the API. You need to be able to get data from your frontend through your API from the database. Get all the board games, as we will see right now, and just throw that back to the frontend and show them. And you have to be able to save data. That's all needed to do. But again, this is data that is in your hands. It is in your database. In your database, where is here? In my database. You're getting your data, you're saving your data, all in pieces of code that you control. That's what you need to do. Mix in data from an external source. So like OMDB, for example. You don't need to fetch data from here and then save it in there. You don't need to use external APIs yet. Okay. Walter, then how do we get the data in the database in the first place? What I would suggest is get at least one example in there. Just, you can do insert document. This is just dummy data. I don't care what I'm getting. Okay. Insert that. That doesn't matter. Of course, how you get it in there, make a post request, make an actual piece of code that places data in the database. That's it. Maybe let's finish with the actual getting of the database. Now, get. We open the collection, or we get the collection for board games. Then we will use collection.find. If we do not pass any parameters, we will get back everything that is in that collection. We parse that to array, and it will either have an error or a result. If there is an error, I'm going to return an actual response immediately, ending this function. Or if there is no error, then I will just send back the result as a JSON. That's it. That's all we need to do. This will get back to my front end, and then we can read it out. One more thing, post. Again, we're getting the correct collection. I am using collection.insert1, insert one document. And what will I insert? The thing that is in my not in my body, the data that is in the request body. Again, how come that this is even readable, that this is even an object? Body parser.json. And this will automatically convert request.body to something readable and to something usable. And it will console log. Now, how do we test that? Get request. Board games. I have all my board games in JSON file. Perfect. Now, post request is a bit more difficult. Don't save. Don't save. Now, the post request, again, I have a post here. It's set to post. It has the same route, of course. And I have some data that I pass along. So again, this is Postman. So in my body, I can add multiple things. Now, what I prefer is to do it raw. To add it raw in here and just copy paste in all the data with and then set it to JSON, which means that it automatically will format the data to JSON when you send it out to your API. That's the data. As you can see, it's food chain magnet 2. You know what? Come on. I'll make something even more realistic. What else do I have? Cosmic Encounter. Cosmic Encounter. Bluff game, card, whatever. This voila. That's my data that I'm going to be inserting. Again, just like NoSQL, just like I said, it doesn't have to have all those things. I cannot add a mechanism. I don't need that. It doesn't have to be the same structure. Again, I would recommend you do, but still, you're your own boss of your own database. Now, if I send that, I will get something back. Something spelled incorrectly. But what it did was, it went from my Postman to my API. It went into the post request. It inserted into the database, and I got just something back. Now, this is not good code. If you have this on your milestone, you will lose points. Just saying. Like, there is something to do with the result. Like the result here, then that means that this returns a promise. You can work with that. If the promise returns failure, the state rejected, then you know that there's an error and you can send back an error. If there is, like, if it's good, you can just send back the result. Okay. How can we check if the data is in there? First of all, I can just go to my web page and refresh that. If I F5, you might not see it because of my minimalistic, amazing design, but here is Cosmic Encounter. So it's at the end. See, the minimalism really gets to the point of like getting your data in front of your eyes. I'm just saying. It's just, they should let me give design 1 and 2. All right. And then, of course, where can we actually check on if it's worked or not? You have one of 3 board games in here. There's a refresh button here. That now 1 of 4. And here, of course, Cosmic Encounter, genre, bluffing game, and funny alien party game as a description. And I just, of course, in an hour, I did all the explanation, but that's basically getting data, getting specific data, and saving data all at once. Of course, you have to do some window dressing. You have to make it a bit more minimalistic with that. So regarding the demo and the access to it, I will now quit the recording here, and you can go on and test your milestone yourself. Good luck.